Hey fellow gliders, welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at one of the most highly requested features over the past month, and this is admin approval for items used. So the premise is something like this. We have users in our app who have items in their inventory, and when they use an item, we as admins want to be alerted to the fact that they've used the item so that we can make something happen either digitally within the app or we can do something physical within their physical environment to acknowledge the fact they've used an item. All right, there's a couple of setup requirements that we have to do here. So we'll go through those requirements and then we'll go and build the actual workflow of users using items in the app. All right, so the first thing is to dive into your item store and create a new column here called consumable. And the reason why I'm creating this column is because I'm thinking of when users use an item, some of them might be consumable items that can only be used once. For example, materials or potions or something like that, right? But there are some items that we're allowing them to use that can be used more than once. Maybe weaponry, maybe tools, maybe relics or powers or something like that, right? And so those are not consumable. And so the consumable items should be deleted from their inventory when they use them. But the non-consumable items should not be deleted from their inventory. So we'll need to build out some logic regarding that. All right, so I built out this consumable column in my store, and I've just checked out the boxes of the ones that are consumable. Okay, next in the inventory sheet, I've then done a lookup of the item called item consumable. And this is a lookup through the relation to item, just to grab that consumable value of being true or false. Done. All right, so now we have whether or not the item is consumable. All right, from here, we need to create a log that we as admins can see when users use an item. If you need that log to be in your Google spreadsheet, feel free to add a sheet there. For my purposes, I'm just going to create a glide table. So I'm just going to do a new empty table. But either way works. And I'll call this used item log. There's only a few values that we need to grab here. I'll start off with the row ID. It's always a good idea to start with the row ID here. Okay, next, this name column I'm going to transform to item. So we need to know the item, specifically the item ID. Next, we need to know the user ID or user email, whichever identifier you're using in your environment. So I'm using email. And lastly, the timestamp, which is a date time column. Done. Okay, from here, we'll also want to maybe do a relation from the item back to the store and the user email back to the user sheet, just to get some images and names and things, because otherwise we won't know necessarily who these people are. So I want to do a relation to item, which would be a relation column, from the item ID to the store row ID. Okay, done. And then I will create a duplicate of this. We'll just call this rel user. And still a relation, but instead of the item ID to the store, we'll do the user email to the user's email. Done. Okay, so then we just do some lookups. So we'll have the item name, which is a lookup column of the rel item. Done. I'll duplicate that and call this item image, which will be a lookup of the rel item, but then we're going to grab the item image. Done. All right, duplicate that again. This will be the user name, still a lookup, but now the rel user username. Duplicate that, and we'll call this user image. Rel user, and we'll grab their rank avatar display. Done. All right, so now we have all of our columns. There's one more column I think we're going to need here, and thinking into the future here, what we are going to want is a way to link their inventory item to the used item sheet. So we need to know kind of a combination. We need to know who's using the item and the item ID that they're using, right? Because more than one user can have the same item they're using, and a particular user might be submitting or using more than one item at a time. So we need to know that combination. So because we need to know that combination, we're going to create a new value here called item plus email, where we're going to do a template column and combine the two things. I'll just do 1-2, replace 1 with the item name, or I guess the item ID, and 2 would be the email. See that? So when I go to create a new record here, it'll combine the item ID and the email into one key that we can then use as a relation in a different sheet. All right, so I'm going to craft this exact same template column in the inventory sheet where the information lives. So again, we'll do item plus email. It's got to match identically. So I'll do 1-2, replace 1 with the item ID. In this case, it's the item ID here. And 2 would be the email of the user email. Done. All right, here in the inventory sheet, we're going to make a relation from the inventory to the used item log. That way we can see whether or not they've used one of the items from their inventory. So we'll call this relation to item used, where we'll do a relation column from the item plus email key we just created. We're going to match the values in the used item log, item plus email key, right? So that'll match all of the items that they've used. All right, so I think we have a pretty good setup here. Now it's just a matter of building out that logic on the front end. So switching over to the layout view, I'm going to go to my inventory here. You see I've created a new item called Summoning Stone, which is a relic, and I'm going to allow users to use this item more than once. It's not a consumable. All right, so diving into this item here, we see that we have this use item button already that we used previously, but we've only configured it for healing potions, which healing potions are always going to be a consumable for my environment. But now we need to edit the logic on that use item button to account for other types of items. So I'm going to dive into this button bar here and configure the right action, which is this use item here. Okay, so this is the logic we use to see whether or not it's a healing potion. Okay, so if it's not a healing potion, now we need to check for something else. The first thing we should check to see is whether or not they've already used this item. So does that relation exist between the item plus email in the inventory sheet and the item plus email in the used item log? So if that relation to item used is not empty, meaning we've used the item, then we can prevent them from spamming the use item button by doing something different. For example, we can play a sound and then show notification like you've already used this item. Be patient. Okay, should be a failure icon, and the play sound can be maybe the hint. Okay, next, if they haven't used the item yet, then the next thing we need to check is whether or not this item is a consumable. Because if it is a consumable, we want to add a new row to the used item log, but we also want to delete it from their inventory. Okay, so we're going to check to see if the item consumable is true. Then we're going to still add a row to the used item log. And we'll just capture those three things: the item ID, the user's email. I guess we can grab the email from the inventory, and the timestamp, current date and time. And then we're going to delete the row. We can also show notification first. Item used. Fine. Okay, if the item is not a consumable, meaning they can use it over and over again, okay, we'll still want to add a row. And this will be to the used item log. Same three things: the item ID, user email, and the current date and time. but we're not going to do the delete row. We'll just show notification, item used. Okay, hit save. All right, so when I hit use item, okay, we should now see that we should get that notification that we used the item, but it should still be in our inventory. Okay, item used. It's still in our inventory, it's still here, but I shouldn't be able to push this button again because that relation to the used item log is now there. And I should get that notification saying, be patient. There we go. All right, so now we've allowed users to use an item and prevented them from using it over and over and over again. And if it's a consumable, it should delete the row too. So let's test that out. I'm gonna give myself some more money here because I'm an admin and I can cheat and I can do what I want. Let's get 50 gold. Okay, let's go to the store and let's buy some lumber. Okay. Let's go back to my inventory. I now have some lumber, and maybe I want to use this item. Okay, so when I use the item, it should be marked to the use item sheet and then delete it from my inventory. There we go. So I've used the item. Cool. All right, so now the last step here is on the admin screen to build out a visualization of the log in order for us to do some sort of approval process. So I'm going to dive over here to the admin tab that we built, and I'm going to create a new inline list, and I'm just going to point it directly to the used item log. And we can call this used item requests. Looks like I have a spare row in there somewhere. Let's go ahead and delete that one, not to confuse ourselves. All right, and how do we want to visualize this? Maybe tiles, so we can see the item itself. Maybe let's do more than one per row. Let's make it a square. And then maybe we'll actually display the user information on top here. So the title can be the name of the item. The details can be the timestamp. Let's go down to the bottom here, and we can add a tag to be the avatar to be the user image, and the caption can be the user name. That looks pretty good. If we want to save more space, we can do an overlay, throw it at the top, make it smaller. Sure. And then lastly, let's sort this where the most recent is first. So we're always seeing the newest at the top of the list, right? So timestamp in reverse chronological order, like that. All right, so now we can dive into this item and then approve it somehow. So I'm going to dive into this item. Again, we need to build out this title here. So I'll just kind of do this quickly, spend some time with this, make it look exactly how you want it. But for the title, we'll just do the item name. Details, again, can be timestamp, image, item image, maybe make it a card view. And then just for sake of time, I'll just use a relation component to show the relation to user, to grab the person's name, and then you can grab whatever you want here. Details can be, the image can be the rank avatar display. All right, so now we can see who is using the item, what the item that they used. We don't want the username here, we want the item name. There we go. So the last step is being able to approve that they've used this item or acknowledge it as an admin. One of two schools of thoughts. Either one, you're just using this as a task list. And so you see that they've used lumber, great. You can mark it off somewhere physically, and then you can just delete the row altogether, which would then break that relation and allow them to use the item again if it's a reusable item. So that's the easy way. Something like this. I'll create a button where we can say approved, and the action will just be something like create a new action. We can show notification, approved, play a sound, and then just delete the row. So approve equals delete log item. Okay. So I'm approving this item. I hit approved. It deletes that record from my item task, right? From my used item sheet. And now the only thing that's left is this summoning stone. Let's say I approve this one as well. I can approve that they've used the summoning stone. It deletes it from my tasks, which also breaks that relation between the inventory and the used item sheet, which means as the user, I can use the item again, right? Item used, but I can't use it a second time because the admin hasn't approved it yet. Once the admin approves it, again, that user can then reuse the item. All right. So that's one school of thought, is we can just delete the record from the used item sheet here. Just kind of keep our sheet really nice and clean. And we're not going to see any log items that we've already approved. However, if you do want to have a running list of all of the items that you've approved at any point in time, just so you can go back and take a look at it, maybe over the past month, and maybe you're going to plan at the end of the month, just delete all of the previous month's log, you can do that too. But you'll need to build out some additional logic. And so the logic here would be to go to the used item log, and instead of deleting the row to break the relation, we'll need to create some sort of condition to break the relation. And here's my recommendation. We can create a new column here called approved on, which would be a date time column. And then when I hit approve, it'll fill in the approved on with a timestamp. And then we're going to check to see if there's a timestamp in here, then we want that relation to break, which means we don't want the item plus email to relate any longer to the inventory sheet. So we'll make this column the condition. So I'm going to create an if then else. We'll say if approved, then no item plus email. So if then else, we'll say if approved on is empty, meaning I haven't approved it yet. Then we want that relation to be there. So we'll have the item plus email. Okay, otherwise, once I've approved it, then we want it to be blank, else nothing. Done. We'll also want some sort of indicator that it's been approved. So I'll duplicate this if then else column here. And we'll say if approved, then approved. So if approved on is empty, we want nothing. Else we'll show the label approved. Done. All right, so we can see that because I haven't approved it yet, it's still displaying the item plus email. But once I approve it today, okay, you see that then it becomes blank, which would then break the relation if we're going to relate to this column instead. All right, so the last step here would be go to the inventory sheet. And for this relation to item used column that we created, we'll instead match to the used item log if approved, no item plus email, like that. Done. All right, so we see that I've already used this item, but once I fill in the approved on, okay, then we see that the inventory should be, that relation is now broken, which means I can reuse this item again. Okay, now let's make that happen on the front end. So what we'll do here is, as an admin, I can visit still this user log, but the approved button won't be to delete the log item. Instead, approve will be to just mark it approved. So instead of delete row, we will do a set column. So we'll set approved on to be the current date and time. Let's go back a screen. Save. All right, so I hit approved, item approved, we go back a screen, and then that means I should be able to use the item again. There we go. I was able to use the item, but I can't use it a second time until the admin approved it. All right, back in the admin screen, this is my newest entry because it's on the left, and I can approve it. Okay, so that should all work. Now, the only difference here is I can't see off the top of my, just from this inline list, whether or not I've approved an item. So we'll want to add that tag. So at the very bottom here on this inline list, on the tag, we'll add the if approved, then approved label like that. So now we can see which items we've already approved moving forward. Okay. If you want to save some space, you can also make this a horizontal orientation here. So that way we'll scroll left and right. What that looks like is once I use the item, back in the admin screen, I can see that this one hasn't been approved yet, and I have a scroll list this way, right? So then I can approve the item that way. Yeah, otherwise, if you don't care, you can stack them vertically too. But I think the horizontal gives a nice cleaner approach. You can kind of then scroll through and swipe through. Might want to turn off the see all and just make it infinite amount. Like that. All right, so again, you have options. There's lots of ways that you can set this process up. This is certainly one way, and it does account for whether the item is consumable or not, and does account for your preference as to whether or not you want to have a running log of all the used items, or whether you're just using it as a task list, and once you approve it, you can delete it from the log. You have options. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to leave me a comment below. You can always reach out to me at Twitter @rpetito. And as always, thanks for watching.